Hello and welcome to a longly requested video. Now back in March 20th of this year we did a Unite tier list and it was quite divisive. It was, some people agreed, some people disagreed. We did it on stream a few months back, and since then people have been asking when's the next new tier list, when's the next tier list, when's the next tier list. Well, I decided eventually it's time to do another one. So last time it was literally on the release of Duraludon. We of course got 3 new characters since then, and we've also had a lot of movement in terms of the meta and in terms of characters having different abilities that are good, some characters being, you know, awful now. So we're going to go talk through them and sort of talk about their original rank as well, and sort of talk whether they've gone up, whether they've gone down, whether they've stayed the same. So firstly we have Venusaur. Venusaur last ranked in the A rank. And I think Venusaur has kind of gone down a little bit since then. It was at a time of Venusaur's, it was kind of a little bit after the Solar Beam build became a thing, and Giga Drain was still a lot more viable. But I think Venusaur's its moves haven't gone down. I just think a little bit of the meta shifted away from Venusaur. I personally still think Venusaur is an A tier, but it's a little bit weak. It could be considered a B tier mon, but I think it's kind of in the BA realm. I think actually I'm going to stick it in B tier. I think I'm being a little bit generous with my own bias. But we're going to stick it in B tier, top of B tier. Last time, Gengar kind of, at the time, was in its probably lowest it maybe ever been in Unite. It was kind of useless. And then kind of shortly afterwards, it got buffed to the moon and became S tier. But it's kind of been nerfed again. And though I wouldn't say Gengar is useless, you really don't see many Gengars anymore. It does really depend on skill. So I think we're going to be starting to see Gengar in the C tier. It's not useless as it was before, but it's just nowhere near as good as it was. On to our next character in Mr. Mime. Now, I don't think Mr. Mime has ever really been high in Unite rankings. He's a very much a unique character. You've got to be pretty skilled to get anything out of him. You really need to work with your team to get anything out of Mr. Mime. And I just think Mr. Mime's had a few, I mean, he's very rarely picked, and he's just not great. I don't think he's been improved since March. I think he's probably gone down. And I think for that reason I'm going to have to put him in D tier. Mr. Mime really doesn't get played. He just really isn't that great. I think if you're picking Mr. Mime, it's kind of you're putting your team more or less of 4v5. He just doesn't really have that much usability unless you're really good at Mr. Mime. So yeah, I think that warrants a D tier. Next we have Snorlax. Now Snorlax was rated in the A tier last time, and I think Snorlax for me has actually gone down in the picks. I think other defenders have kind of improved a lot, and some defenders have kind of taken over Snorlax's place. But this is controversial. We had some wanting him S last time, some wanting him C, and then he got A originally. I think he's currently in the B tier for me. I think he's still pretty good. I think you could justify an A for Snorlax if you had a very good player with Snorlax. I think a lot of players these days play a damaged Snorlax, which I do think is pretty strong. I just think Snorlax is not as good as other defenders, and that's kind of what drags it down. It's probably above Venusaur in terms of ability, but again, it's in that same category of Venusaur. That's like a B+ rating. It's probably a little bit too good for B, but it's not quite good enough for A, so it will get the B rating from me. Next we had Gardevoir, and Gardevoir placed in B last time, and Gardevoir's always been a controversial character. It's really squishy, it can do a lot of damage, it can be really great, but it can be really shit. And I think just generally Gardevoir and Gengar kind of share similar rankings a lot, tend to be. They usually tend to be buffed and nerfed at the same time. I currently think Gardevoir is above Gengar. I think, again, depending on skill, you can maybe argue B. But I think currently Gardevoir overall is a C. I just think, again, the introduction of more attackers into the game. I mean, if you look at the end here, there's 3 new attackers, pretty much 3 of the last 4 attackers. and they're all pretty much better than Gardevoir in every way. So, you know, it's just difficult. Gardevoir just struggles with the fact that it's in a category that has a lot of better options, rather than it being necessarily terrible. At the top, the tippity top, I don't even need to talk about this one right now. Absol is S tier. He is outrageously good. We last placed him in C. He's been on a rise, continual rise. The new patch has given Absol absolute freedom over the game. He's just incredible. He just one-shots everything. He's so good early. He's still viable late. And his big weakness before was that for Zapdos he was just weak and he'd get killed easy. Now he's still a threat. And he's just almost just as much as threat as the mid game, which is really dangerous. Really difficult to deal with Absol. There's only a few characters in the entire game that can even remotely deal with him. And if you give a good player an Absol, yeah, it's going to be a difficult game for the other team. Next character is Garchomp. Now, Garchomp's also been a controversial one. I personally have always said Garchomp is better than people say he is. We last put him in like a low B, and I think this is where he stays. I don't really feel like he's changed that much. I think in a good player's hands, you'll get a lot out of Garchomp, but I also think at the same time, you know, you're not going to, you know, wipe teams have got. You could wipe teams, but you probably won't with Garchomp. There are probably better all-rounders generally than him, but if you have given a good player Garchomp, again, it's going to be good. It just is I think a lot of Garchomp's problems have just come with, again, all-rounders being better than him and skill issues. The next all-rounder is probably one of the favourites generally throughout the game, just in terms of ranking, is Lucario. We ranked him S last time, and I actually think this is going to be controversial. I think he may be dropping to the A tier, and this is going to be really controversial here, but I just think Lucario's pick rate, from what I've seen, is just really down. You don't see that many Lucarios anymore, and that's a lot down to Absol's rise. Absol being a melee attacker that's just better than Lucario is an issue. There's obviously different ways Lucario is better than Absol, but I think to be S tier, you really need to be like, if we don't pick him, we're going to be in trouble. And you're just not, because Absol is so good now. He can play that solo laner, in my opinion, and Absol's a bit more versatile because he can play jungle as well. I still think Lucario is the tippy top of A tier, but I just think that right now, maybe just due to Absol being so good, Lucario is like A+ tier. The next person we have is Crustle, who last ranked in the D tier, and Crustle is been on a pretty big improvement since then. He's pretty viable now if you go for a damage build. He's still not very good, I don't think, with a defensive build, which does limit him a little bit. Do I think he's better than Snorlax? It's a tricky one. I do kind of think they are around the same, personally. Probably not as good as Venusaur, but better than Chomp, is where Crustle currently sits. I mean, it's a massive improvement. He was probably the worst, or if one of the worst characters in the game before, and now he's pretty decently viable. I do think if you're playing him as a pure defender, you're not playing him right anymore. You've really got to go for a damage build of X-Scissor and Shell Smash, but with that in mind, you can get a lot out of him being in the B tier. Next we have Greninja. Now Greninja placed a high A tier last time, and I think Greninja's been in a weird transitional state. They kind of looked to try and nerf Shuriken quite a lot, and kind of buff Surf, but I still think Greninja is still A tier for me. I just think he is, in the right player's hands, he can be dangerous. He's a great jungle, but I just think he's kind of like a low A tier. He's definitely got down a little bit, but I think he's better than Venusaur all round. I think you can still use Shuriken if you wanted to, and I think you can use Surf, obviously. I just think Greninja is kind of useful for, like, you know, those sneaky players who love to get those little sneaky points and kills. I think he's just really good at that. He's got like kind of a unique play style, I think, that kind of lends to him being a really good jungler. I think him being stuck in low A tier, though, is kind of his max, because right now I think there's a lot of junglers that are just better than him, and yeah, they kind of get push Greninja down a little bit. Talonflame last placed in A tier, and I think Talonflame has dropped a lot. I think again due to Absol being so good, why would you pick Talon over Absol? It doesn't really make sense. I think Talon is probably around C tier. I really don't see the viability of Talon. You do see it picked a lot, but do you see him do well? Not really. Probably better than Gardevoir and Gengar right now, but I mean, Talon can be good. It just really, I just don't see why you'd pick Talon at all. It's not D tier because it's not bad, but it's just, again, it's in a category where, I mean, it's competing against Greninja, Absol, you know, and plenty of other guppy characters in here that haven't been in the list yet. And I just think you just don't pick Talon. Like, why would you do that? It just doesn't make sense. And next we have Charizard. Now, we placed Charizard in an interesting place last time. We placed him in A, which was a very controversial topic. Many people thought he should be lower. Many thought he could be higher. I actually think Charizard's improved quite a bit since that time. I think he isn't A tier though. I still think that A tier rating team we gave him was well too high. I didn't agree with it at the time, but you know, chat made me, so personally I think he's at the bottom of B tier. I think he's very good in certain situations, but again, it can be difficult for him to really shine that much. Again, in a area where, you know, in lane where he's not one of the better laners. I just think that, again, you see him a lot in jungle as well, and jungle Charizard is good, but it's just not as good as Gren, it's not as good as Absol, and there's just other characters that are just way better than him. And for a second entry in D tier, a surprise drop, I think, is Zorora. Zorora was placed C tier last time. It was kind of a comfortable C tier, and I think D tier is kind of where he is. I think he's better than Mime, but Zorora just not good. They just keep nerfing Zorora for some reason. He seems to be getting a lot of bad treatment from the Unite devs. I don't know what it is, but they just don't seem to like him. He keeps getting, you know, when we thought Lucario was going to get dropped down, it kind of keeps going to Zorora. He's by far and away, in my opinion, the worst all-rounder currently in the game. I just don't think you can really get any worse than Zorora right now in terms of all-rounders. I just think he's a bit meh. Needs a really big buff to get him up to a better level, and at least towards Chomp's level. But yeah, I just think right now he's just a weak character. Cinderace was a incredibly high-ranked character last time out, but really has dropped quite a lot. Again, I think jungle has improved. I think Cinderace has been nerfed somewhat. They've nerfed Cinderace down, probably due to the new attackers coming in. But for me, Cinderace is probably now a B tier. It's gone down quite significantly, probably below Venusaur here. Cinderace is still good. You wouldn't tend to go Cinderace lane, and again, it's just not one of the strongest junglers. So it kind of sits in this. It's good, but it's kind of waiting for a nerf in the upper tiers to then probably fly back up again. You really don't see many Cinderaces anymore. There's a certain other fire character that's taken over pretty much all of Cinderace's player base, and it may eventually actually even fall into C if it keeps going in the trajectory it's going, but we'll see. Another character that was S tier that's had a massive drop is Eldegoss. Now, Eldegoss was so good when we were last playing the game, last ranking in the game in March, but really he's just fallen. I mean, nobody plays Eldegoss anymore. It's just kind of died. I'm not really sure why. I just feel like it's been nerfed a little bit, and it's kind of just made Eldegoss rubbish. And there's other supports that have been really heavily buffed, and I think that is why we're seeing Eldegoss kind of fall from S to D. Yeah, I think a little buff and maybe some nerfs around other places could see Eldegoss fly up the rankings. Another Pokemon that's had a bit of a glow up is Cram. Cram was ranked in D tier last time, and I think Cram was probably the worst Pokemon in the game in March. It did no damage. It was rubbish. Pretty much the day after we did the tier list, there was an update, and Cram kind of jumped from D to B, but I actually think Cram is currently in A. And I'll tell you why. Cram on its own is probably a B tier mom, but in a 1-1-3, Cram can be so annoying. Its ult is really good. It just has a lot of annoying abilities. And I think early game, and especially mid game, Cram is quite a formidable opponent. It is crap late game still. But what I do think is that Cram can really influence that early mid game where maybe your Venusaur's not fully evolved, or maybe your Gengar's not fully evolved, or whatever. Those level 9 Evos haven't evolved yet, and Cram can really step in and do a lot of damage. I think Cram is incredibly underrated. At the moment, I think every time I play against a Cram, it's really difficult to kill or face, unless you get right close to it, and then it kind of dies. But I really think Cram is, just a really strong Mon. It's kind of, I think, undervalued a little bit at the moment, but I think, for me, it's quite a low A tier. Next Mon was Blastoise, which we gave low A. And I think Blastoise hasn't really moved that much. It has gained a lot more viability with the Rapid Spin build. I think it's probably... this is a tricky one. I think Blastoise may be an A. Now, again, it's kind of like it went down to B, but then went back up to A because Rapid Spin build got really buffed quite significantly. And they blasted a lot more viable from that perspective. I think Blastoise is just a little bit better than Snorlax. I do kind of think Snorlax is like the tippity top of B tier. I don't think we really should be putting any Mons above it. The next Pokemon is Pikachu. We put Pikachu top of A tier, and I think Pikachu, for me, early game Pikachu is S tier, and late game it's kind of C tier, and that's kind of the way it's always been for Pikachu. The only thing that stops Pikachu right now is the fact I think they've added more early game attackers to the game, or earlier game attackers, which kind of drops Pikachu down a bit. And I think this kind of makes Pikachu in between these two. I think Pikachu falls to B purely based on the fact that late game it is entirely useless. Its ult does nothing late game, and like unlike Cram, at least Cram has ridiculous range. Pikachu has to kind of get in a little bit with his moves. I just always said that Pikachu's late moveset is actually worse than its early moveset. It's weird, but Electro Web is probably the best move it has. And yeah, I don't know. Pikachu doesn't feel like it's just as good as Cram right now, and probably not as good as Venusaur for stealing things, so that is why it sits in B. Alolan Ninetales is an interesting one. We ranked it B last time, and honestly, I just think it's B still. I think it's probably somewhere in here. It just doesn't really move. It's good. It's just not like, it's not great. It's just good. Wiggly is an interesting one. Wiggly was really strong and in fact an S tier Mon, but I think again due to nerfs and buffs to other Mons, it kind of falls into C tier. It's kind of around here. I think Wiggly is still good, but it just there's two other support characters we'll get into in a minute that are just so good that I just don't see why you pick Wiggly anymore. I kind of realised that myself recently, that Wiggly just isn't at it during these games. Mainly down to, I think, 113, at least in my rank, kind of being less common, maybe. But, I don't know, Wiggly was the queen of 113, and I think a little bit that, I think that's kind of not died, but it's definitely decreased somewhat across the meta at the moment. And I think that's kind of hurted Wiggly's overall position. Next character is Slowbro. We ranked him in A, and honestly, I think he's pretty high A tier. Probably below Lucario, but he is very high. Amnesia Skull is great. Telekinesis Surf is also good. I think you can build him attacking, you can build him defensively. Slowbro is probably, in my opinion, the best defender in the game. Maybe with one other defender that's kind of on the same tier as him, but he's very, very good. He's not quite S. I don't think if you don't have him, you really miss out a lot necessarily. But when you have him, he's really great. He's really great, but someone who can just deal a lot of single target damage too. I think it's just great. Slowbro's just really great. He has the best Sable in the game. It's just brilliant. Next is Machamp. We rated Machamp in B tier last time. I do kind of think Machamp has improved a little bit. He's probably around here in A tier. Champ is really great. He can deal a lot of damage. He's pretty annoying to deal with. You can really die quite quickly to a champ, and I just think just overall he gets picked a lot more now than he did used to be picked. I think it's just down to him being just a lot stronger. And our next new entry into the S tier is Blissey. Now Blissey has had probably one of the biggest buffs I've seen, in that it basically got given a damaging increased buff to one of the least damaging mons. And it just really made Blissey really difficult to kill. Blissey can deal decent damage, can give you knockback, and can just heal itself continuously till it eventually it kills you. Blissey's just a nightmare to deal with, and if you have a Blissey on your team, and people know how to use it, then it can be really devastating. For the other team, it can be really difficult to get rid of it. A good Blissey would just annihilate lanes on its own, and yeah, it's not a real fun time if you play against a Blissey at the moment. Mamu is the next person on the tier list, and Mamu placed in A last time. I think Mamu's had a bit of a downgrade. I think he's in C tier somewhere. I think he's probably potentially the worst defender in the game right now. I just don't think he's great. His pick rate is abysmal from what I've seen in the game. I don't really see many Mamus anymore. It's just kind of sad. He just doesn't really seem to be that great at the moment. I think maybe a buff is inbound for him and he'll bump back up the ratings. But we'll see. Sylveon is next. Sylveon plays B, and I think honestly Sylveon just hasn't moved. If anything, Sylveon might be a C now, just due to other attackers. You know what? I'm going to say Sylveon is a C. I just think Sylveon is it's the Pokemon is meh incarnate. It's just a meh mon. It's okay. It's not great. It's just I think they need to really give the evolutions a little bit of an oomph, because they just don't feel that great right now. A little bit underwhelming. And the next addition to A tier is Greedent. We played him in A last time. He doesn't really move. I feel like he hasn't really changed that much. Greedent, really, he's somewhere around here. Probably is below Slowbro, but above Blastoise. I think he's annoying to deal with, but ultimately you can deal with him if you persevere. He's just great. If you know how to play Greedent and you know how to steal jungle and you know how to cause as much havoc as possible, Greedent's a great character. Last time we rated Decidueye in C, but I think Decidueye's had a little bit of an upgrade. It's now probably low B tier. It's just pretty good. It's obviously extremely useful. It always has been. But if you get your abilities off of Decidueye, you can get some serious kills as well as some serious damage. I just think Decidueye is kind of a bit more useful than Sylveon and Gardevoir in particular. And I think that just kind of what bumps Decidueye up a little bit. Dragonite last time placed in B, and for this time I feel like Dragonite is kinda been a bit improved. I'm not sure how big he's been improved really. I personally still think he's in the B tier, kind of around here. I think he's been improved, but I just don't know. I'm not convinced. I think he's a bit overhyped. A lot of people seem to think he's really good. I just don't think he is. He's good and he's definitely viable, but he's just not worth. Like, I think if you want to pick an all-rounder, you just go, a melee all-rounder, or like just an all-rounder in general. You go Machamp or Lucario. Or you could go Zarina, who is definitely an A tier. Zarina is so good right now, in my opinion. It's probably one of the, apart from the very first time it launched, it's probably the second or third best it's been. It's just really strong. I just think generally the speed of attacks are great. It can double up attacks when it charges up. It's great. It just melts people, especially squishier mons. So I think Zarina really deserves the A tier, and an upgrade from B tier that it was last time. Trevenant was absolutely dog shit last time we played. D tier quite comfortably. No, you couldn't use this damn thing. Now, for me, it's probably the bane of my existence. it's on par with Slowbro in my opinion. It's in a different reason though. It's just really annoying. You can't get rid of it. You have to wait for his abilities to run out. It's just a nightmare. It can pin you back. It can cause you so many issues, and if you don't deal with it, I think it can really just cause havoc, especially in Zapdos fights. Just pinning enemies away from the team and just getting them killed. Yeah, Trevenant is really a nightmare right now, and I think if it was any better, it'd probably be S, but I think currently right now it sticks at A. Egg Slash is next, and for me, I think this is the third addition to S tier. I think Egg Slash is incredibly underrated right now. I think people are going to probably salute me for saying Egg Slash is better than Lucario, but I really just think he is. Right now, Egg Slash is so strong. He gets picked so much as well. I think it's just down to him being really great, especially in jungle as well. Absol and Egg Slash run the meta, I feel like, at the moment. They're both so good. I really think that he can just dominate games and just kind of control them if he's a jungler, or he can just come into a fight and just kill 2 people in an instant and then leave, like, and use the shield to heal. And it's just he's not as good as Absol, because Absol can genuinely like one-shot everybody, but he's not far off Egg Slash. And to keep going with the S tier theme, Hooper is also S tier, mainly down to just the fact that its ability to teleport you around the map is just broken fundamentally. If you don't have a Hooper and the other team does, you're at a disadvantage immediately, especially if it goes Hyperspace Hole. And yeah, if you play it against a Hooper, it's just difficult. And I think any 5-stack probably needs a Hooper, just so you don't get lost in teleports and rotates are just instant, rather than being, you know, one guy doesn't rotate or 2 guys doesn't rotate to the right spot. You got all your rotates there sorted for you. And Hooper retains is the only Mon in this tier list that will retain its S tier ranking. Duraludon. Now, Duraludon had just come out, so it's dropped from S tier. I think Duraludon is now, for me, a B tier. It's probably between around Ninetales level for me. He's dropped significantly, but that's because he needed to be nerfed, and the nerfs have been pretty harsh. So he's still kind of, maybe in the future you might see him climb back up again, but he was so badly broken when we first saw him. So it's good to see that he's been nerfed and is not anymore in like the stratosphere that he was. Next is Azumarill, and I'll be honest, I've never really been a big fan of Azumarill. I think Azumarill is genuinely a potential case for D tier here, but for the sake of Azumarill fans, I'm going to put him in low C. I just think Azumarill is just not that useful, just not that great. It's just the worst. I was going to say, is it the worst all-rounder? I don't know. It's just not great. You know, why would you bother? It's kind of the thing. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have any really great abilities as well, and I just think it's kind of just meh, and it's just like, why would you pick Azumarill in this situation? Next up is Espeon, and Espeon is pretty trash. Again, like I said, Evolution's just not good. Sylveon is just not good, and I hope Glaceon, when it gets into the game, will be a lot better than the Evolutions, because these two are just really naff. They're just not fun. They're not great to play. Espeon's just not great in general. Attackers are pretty stacked, and to be a good attacker these days, especially with some of the buffs to Absol and Egg Slash, it's pretty hard, I'll be honest. So yeah, that one has to be put in D tier. And finally we have Delphox. I'm putting Delphox in the second highest A. I think it's not quite S. Delphox's CC is insane, and damage is pretty good. Its pick rate is insane. Like, you see Delphox every game. The only reason why it's not S is genuinely down to the fact that I think pre-getting Fire Spin, it's kind of shit. And if it had a bit more damage early, I think this thing would be S tier quite comfortably. But early game it can struggle, and if the enemy team keeps you away from Fire Spin, you're not really a threat. So you need to hit Fire Spin, and as soon as you hit Fire Spin, Delphox is just dangerous for the rest of the game. But yeah, I think that's kind of appropriate rating for Delphox. Again, it could be buffed a little bit, and it'd be probably pretty high S. But that's why it's not quite S. I just don't think it's quite ready to be an S tier yet. But that is it. It's pretty big changes. I think D tier is entirely different. I think C tier. I think the only S tier was Hooper. A few A tiers remain the same. I think this Lucario call is going to be very controversial. People aren't going to like that, I don't think. But hey, what can you do? Well, that's been me. I'd like to see your reaction to this. I'll be posting it over the next couple of days. So yeah, I'll see you next time.